grew up in Scarsdale, New York, and I've been drawing and painting since I could hold a brush. Specifically, I love working with watercolor. I was very fortunate in the sense that my parents were able to give me a lifetime of support, supplies, and private art classes. That kind of upbringing gave me opportunities that I'm fully aware most people don't get. After college, I had the financial means and, most importantly, the time to focus on being a full-time artist. I know how lucky that makes me, and I've never taken it for granted. Because of that freedom, I've been able to travel and paint for long periods of time. In the last 10 years, though, I've become especially fond of going completely off-grid where I can be alone for days at a time with no phones or distractions or pressure. I love quietly being in nature, and I feel that my best work comes out when I can do that. When I travel these days, I usually find a small rental house or take my RV, which I absolutely love. In October of 2021, I was on one of these trips. I was staying at a vacation home owned by my father's friend in Dedham, Maine, and I'd been working on a series of paintings that showcased New England in the fall. I drove up to Dedham from New York and had no time constraints with the house, as their family only used it in the summer. I had planned on being there for about a week, but I could have stayed longer if I needed to. The house itself was far more than enough. I think it had 4 or 5 bedrooms, and normally I'd never stay somewhere like that, but I also knew it was surrounded by private land without a neighbor in sight, and creatively I thought that was perfect. There's something about isolation that clears my head like nothing else can. The day I got there, I unpacked and mostly walked around the property, but I didn't paint at all, which was normal. I like having a full day to settle into a new place and get the lay of the land, and the autumn colors had been near their peak. That night I went to bed perfectly calm and happy to be there. On that first night I couldn't have slept any better, but I had a vivid dream about my brother and sister showing up to the house in the middle of the night. I remember opening the front door and being shocked and excited to see them standing there because they live in different states and the 3 of us are rarely together at one time. It didn't make any logical sense, but like any dream, you don't question it. They stayed outside on the patio and asked if I wanted to go for a walk. I put my coat and shoes on and walked with them around the property. Specifically, we went into the woods behind the house together to look at the fall foliage, even though it was still nighttime in my dream. None of the details made sense, but I was happy to be with my siblings. When I woke up, I remember thinking it was a very odd dream to have, but a good one. The next few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. I spent hours outside painting with warm cups of tea, and the weather was incredible for October. I barely spoke out loud and was completely in my head in the best way. The only thing that was slightly distracting me was my sleep. I continued to dream that my brother and sister were coming to the house. It wasn't the same every time, but they would always show up at night and knock on the door, and every time they would ask me to come outside with them. The first time had been to walk, and another time they needed help bringing things in from their car. I started to think I was causing them to happen by overthinking and latching on to the first dream. By the 4th night, I was close to getting my phone out of the car to call them. I felt like I was having some kind of premonition or something was wrong. I wasn't particularly scared by it, just a little uncomfortable, and I was thinking about it a lot. I had never dreamt about the same thing more than once like that. Around 11 o'clock that night, I was reading on a big leather chair in the main room of the house because I was having a hard time sleeping. The gas fireplace was on and the house was quiet. Then I could have sworn I heard the back door gently close. This door was through the kitchen, and it wasn't a loud noise, but it was a distinct click that sounded like the latch, and it immediately scared me. Like anyone would, I thought someone had walked into the house. I jumped off the chair, terrified to really do anything. Then I picked up the closest object I could find, which was a rock from this bowl of decorative river rocks and candles on the coffee table, and walked toward the kitchen. I had stayed alone like this for years, and I had never had anything happen before. The idea of someone coming through the gated driveway and into the house was incredibly scary. When I could see there wasn't anyone in the kitchen, I checked the door and it was still locked, which made me feel a lot better. Nothing looked like it had been touched, and after standing there for a minute and listening, I thought it had to be another noise from the house I wasn't familiar with. After that minor heart attack, I went back to the chair in the living room to try and calm down again. Maybe a half hour later, I did calm down and was finally feeling tired enough to sleep. I was still reading, but I could feel myself dozing off, and I was thinking about going upstairs to bed. That was when I heard another noise that I thought was a mouse. It sounded like something small moving on the floor around the side of the fireplace. The living room of this house had very large vaulted ceilings and a stone fireplace that went all the way up. The stairway to get to the bedrooms was behind the fireplace and attached to the back side of it. I remember pulling my feet up onto the chair and staring at that side of the fireplace where it went back and under the stairs. I was really waiting to see a small rodent run across the floor. Then I did see something move, but instead of it being a mouse, I saw an arm and a hand come from around the back of the fireplace and into the light. I completely froze in the chair with a level of terror that is indescribable. The only explanation for what was happening is that someone else was in the house. I literally couldn't move, not even to pick up the rock again. I pushed myself back into the chair with my feet and said out loud, "Whoever is there, I have a weapon." It was the only thing I could get out, even though I had nothing. Right after I said that, the most unhuman head and upper body moved out from behind the fireplace, and my entire life changed. What I was looking at had no place on this earth. Its skin was a horrible pale color with a wrinkled texture, and its face was almost featureless other than disturbingly large black eyes. There was nothing familiar about it. A fear hit me that I didn't know was possible. The only thing I remember was screaming at the top of my lungs, and then it was too much for me. My vision went into a full tunnel and I passed out. After that, I had no conception of time passing and I didn't dream. I only opened my eyes to see the smallest amount of light. It actually took me a second to understand where I was, but I hadn't moved from the chair in the living room and I was seeing the first morning light through the windows. I felt terrified and relieved at the same time because I remembered everything that had happened, but the fact that it was morning and I was still there made me think it was a nightmare. I thought I must have fallen asleep while reading and had the most vivid and horrific dream of my life. As it got brighter outside, my fear faded, but any creative energy I might have had was gone. I did not want to stay in that house another night, so I packed up and left before noon. It was really during the drive home that everything started to unravel for me. It didn't seem to matter what music I put on or what I tried to think about. It was an all-day drive and I could not get that nightmare out of my head. I was also dwelling on the dreams about my brother and sister showing up, and that's where it really went south. Every time I pictured them coming to the door, it wasn't them anymore. It was two of those horrible alien beings I saw in my nightmare. It made me realize that it hadn't actually been my siblings. I was only remembering it that way when I'd wake up instead of what was actually there. I kept thinking about putting my coat and shoes on and willingly walking with them away from the house. And once those thoughts entered my mind, I genuinely felt like they weren't dreams. It felt like I physically left the house every night and didn't know what I was doing. Another thing that I couldn't ignore was that I had been wide awake when I heard the latch on the back door. I know that happened, and even though I didn't see anything in the kitchen when I got up, I still think something came in. Over the last 4 years, I've come to believe I had a close encounter at that house. I think those beings appeared to me as family members so I would be comfortable enough to go with them. When I look back now, they feel like real experiences, not dreams. I also believe that what I saw come around the fireplace was actually there and 100% real, and I am so thankful I passed out. That was my absolute limit for fear, and my body just shut down. Another thing I'm fairly confident about is if they wanted to hurt me, they could have, so whatever their intentions might have been, I don't think they were bad. Maybe it was pure curiosity and we are just that interesting. It changed everything for me and had a major impact on my life. I have no doubts anymore about other life visiting and interacting with us. I know deep down now that these experiences people talk about are real, and nothing anyone says could ever convince me otherwise. This happened when I was just old enough to stay at home alone right before my 13th birthday. The house we lived in at the time had a bonus room upstairs with 2 big windows, and it's where I had my TV and video games set up. Whenever I would stay home by myself, I was almost always in that room except for the occasional trip downstairs to grab a soda or a snack. From those big windows, we could sometimes see airplanes taking off and landing at a tiny local airport about a mile or 2 from our house. These weren't jets or larger prop planes, it was only small 1- and 2-person aircraft and the occasional helicopter. I don't even know what you'd call an airport that size technically, but it was tiny. One night when I was home by myself and sitting in my beanbag chair playing a game, I happened to look out the window right as a plane was coming down to land. It was dark enough to where I couldn't see the plane itself, but I could see the blinking lights on it. I watched the lights drop below the trees in our backyard and disappear, the way they always did when a plane landed there. Then, less than a minute later, I saw what looked like the same plane coming back up, like it had touched down and immediately taken off again. I can't be completely sure it was the same plane, but since it had only gone down for about 30 seconds, I assumed it was. There was one difference when it came back up though. As it gained altitude, there was a really bright red light trailing behind it. You could see that it wasn't part of the plane itself, but it looked exactly like a big red light bulb tied to the plane with a cable or a tether. As I was watching it, that's actually what I thought it was, some kind of streamer with a light on the end. It also followed the plane perfectly, so I figured it had to be attached. When it got up in the air, the plane never left the area. It stayed right around the airport, circling the same spot over and over again. I even opened the window and I could hear the engine in the distance. It was flying in a really tight, close pattern, and I couldn't figure out why it would be doing that. It must have made 10 full passes around the airport, which really stood out to me. I had never seen another plane do anything like that in all the years we lived there. Like I said, the airport was so small, we were lucky if we saw 3 planes come and go in a full day, and sometimes there were none at all. Seeing one stay in the air that long and going around in circles was unusual enough on its own, but this one had that light behind it. It definitely had my full attention, so I shut off my game and stared out the window. Finally, I saw the plane make one last circle, then it started descending like it was going to land. As it went down, something so weird happened. The red light that had been behind it didn't go down with the plane, it stayed in the sky right at the altitude where the plane started descending. I was thinking the pilot had cut it loose before he landed for some reason, but it really didn't make any sense. It had me glued to what was happening. I expected the red light to float back down to the ground, but it just stayed there, hovering over the airport for what felt like a long time. I wasn't really paying attention to how long it was, but I had enough time to run downstairs and outside to look at it from the back of our garage. After trying to figure out what was going on, I eventually went back up to the bonus room and couldn't believe it was still sitting in the sky after that much time. It wasn't blinking or moving in any direction, and even though it was a mile or so away, I don't think it moved an inch. I had become so invested in this thing that I pulled the screen out of the window and climbed out onto the roof of our back porch to get the best view. I really wanted to see what was going to happen, and I also wanted to be outside in case I could hear anything, which I never did. I sat out on the roof for 10 or 15 minutes, then without any warning at all, the red light exploded across the sky horizontally and went to the left of our house at an unbelievable speed. It is not an exaggeration when I say this was lightning bolt fast, and I basically lost sight of it instantly when my house blocked the view. What was even crazier is that it left a faint streak behind it in the sky like a contrail, so you could easily see which direction it had gone. Up until that moment, I had thought it was some kind of balloon or floating beacon that the airport was using. That sounds stupid because it wouldn't make any sense, but it's what I was thinking at the time. When I saw it take off the way it did, especially leaving that streak behind, the speed alone had me sitting in total awe. It was faster than anything I could even imagine. This all happened years before people were flying drones too. I don't think I had even heard the word drone yet, and that's why my mind went to a floating beacon instead. After it shot across the sky, I jumped back in the window, ran downstairs, and went out to our front yard hoping to see anything else. I could still see its path because the trail was in the sky, but the light itself was long gone. I stood in the yard watching the streak fade away just like a contrail would, but I never saw anything else. Not too long after it all happened, I remember running out to the driveway and telling my parents as soon as they pulled up. They thought it was mildly interesting, but the only thing I got out of them was, "Wow, that must have been something." Their lack of enthusiasm was annoying, and I wish they could have seen it with their own eyes. Since I was young, I think they assumed I had seen something ordinary and just didn't understand what it was. As I got older, this amazing sighting never left my memory. I can still picture it perfectly and remember every detail, and I've always known it was something special. The one thing I can say is that experience was the reason I became interested in space. Seeing something like that at such a young age made me start to wonder. It lit a fire in me and gave me a ton of curiosity about rockets and satellites and spacecraft, even military aircraft and weapons technology. For all I know, what I saw was a test of some ultra-high-speed missile, and they chose that tiny, insignificant airport so it wouldn't be seen by many people. I'm still confident that what I saw shouldn't be possible, even by today's standards. I know how fast the advanced drones we have now can accelerate from a dead stop, and while it's amazing and impressive, it's still nowhere near what I saw. That red light covered miles of distance in an instant, and I'll never forget it. I'll finish with one last thought. I love thinking about other life and advanced civilizations out there in the universe, but I have a hard time believing that my sighting was alien or extraterrestrial in nature. I would never rule it out entirely, but personally, I think there's a 99.9% chance it was from Earth, and I just happened to be lucky enough to see it. What it was or why it was over our tiny airport, I have no idea. I'm just glad I got to experience it. My experience happened during a ski trip to Whitefish, Montana with 6 of my friends. Our group consisted of 3 couples, so 3 guys and their girlfriends, then me, the only single one in the 7th wheel. They had all rented a legit 3-story log cabin, and this place had real huge logs. It was one of the nicest houses I've ever been in, with huge windows, nice furniture, and everything inside was top of the line. They had it for 3 nights, but I could only make the last 2, so everyone else had been there for a day before I showed up. I rolled in around the afternoon and the trip started out great. Everybody was in a good mood and the cabin was awesome, and the next morning we were at the mountain right after they opened. It was a solid ski day at a pretty low-key resort, and Whitefish was such a cool little town. That night we went back to the house with 3 pizzas and some beer. There was a hot tub on the main floor balcony, so we spent most of the evening out there getting in and out of the tub and talking. I want to emphasize something too. None of us were drunk or being stupid. We were just moderately drinking and enjoying ourselves. Around midnight, the 3 girls and one of the guys were still in the hot tub while my 2 friends and I were sitting in chairs on the balcony. Nothing was happening other than some fun conversations. Then one of the girls said something about lights in the sky, and that got everyone's attention pretty quickly. We could all see that there were 3 obvious lights moving around in kind of a clump. They for sure weren't airplanes because of the way they were moving, and the best way I can describe what they were doing is dancing. All 3 of them were flying around each other, making these fluid wave shapes. They would all be together, then one of them would go off in another direction and the other 2 would follow. I want to say it looked playful, which sounds weird to say. Every one of us had our eyes on them, and they kept doing that same thing for a long time. Anyone else in town who was awake and looking should have easily seen it, so we couldn't have been the only ones who witnessed this. After something like 10 full minutes, my friend Clint grabbed his bright Petzl headlamp. Then he leaned over the balcony railing and started making big circles with his arm while aiming it right toward the lights. He said he was going to signal them, and we thought it was funny since he'd had a few beers and was just messing around. He did that a few times and nothing happened at first. Then the 3 lights separated and dropped down, stopping in one line along the horizon. This made our entire group burst out laughing, and we were telling him that it worked and to keep doing it. The lights didn't do anything after they lined up horizontally like that. They just sat in a straight line. Clint finally stopped with the headlamp because his arm was tired, and right when he turned it off, the craziest thing happened. A meteorite came down and flew across the sky, and it was a bright one. It started out like any other shooting star, but as it reached the end of its arc, it kept getting brighter. There was a lot of snow on the ground, so maybe it reflected the light, but for a second or two, I swear it looked daylight bright out. Then it completely burned up and went out. I've only seen one other shooting star like that in my life, where I watched it cut through the atmosphere and burn up with a flash, and it was on a camping trip with my dad. This one looked really close to that, but it was so much brighter at the end. If we would have only seen that by itself, it would have been amazing, but since it happened along with the other lights, it felt like something incredible was going on. Also, since everyone's attention had been on the shooting star, we totally missed the 3 small lights go away. They were gone after the sky lit up. We stayed out on the deck for a little longer, but it seemed like the show was over. It was late by that time anyway, and we were all tired, so we went inside to get some sleep. This was when everything started to feel way off. I vaguely remember 2 of the couples going straight from the balcony into their rooms without saying a thing to anyone. Then it was just me, Clint, and his girlfriend in the living room. I went into my room, and the only thing I remember doing is falling onto the bed. That's it. I didn't brush my teeth or take my clothes off. I just fell on the bed. When I went to bed, Clint and his girlfriend were the last ones up. I know that for sure. I was out cold until morning and woke up in the exact same position as when I had fallen on the bed, face down and on top of the blankets. I also happened to be the first one awake in the house that morning. I walked out into the kitchen and living room, and the first thing I saw was Clint passed out on the L-shaped leather couch. His girlfriend was also asleep, but she was sitting upright on the other side of the couch with her head all the way back and her mouth open. The place was a complete mess too. There were open pizza boxes and full plates and drinks around. Everything was left exactly as it had been when we came inside. I also noticed that the doors out to the balcony weren't even closed all the way, so cold air was coming in. No one had cleaned anything up or put food away or even shut the door. Clint and his girlfriend hadn't even made it to their room, which was maybe 10 steps from the kitchen. I started cleaning up mostly because I wanted to help out. Then I made a pot of coffee, and eventually people started getting up. When Clint finally woke up, he got his girlfriend up too, and they were both confused about why they hadn't gone to bed. I clearly remember his girlfriend saying she had no memory of coming inside. That morning had already felt strange, but then 2 more things happened that really made me think something was wrong with us. The first thing was shocking, and it was when Clint walked out of the bathroom with a white towel on his face. There was bright red blood all over it, and everyone freaked out a little and went over to him. He said he had just been standing there going to the bathroom, and his nose started gushing blood, and it looked bad too. He used one of the nice white towels that were in the house, and there was a lot of blood on it. He sat down on the couch with his head back, holding the towel there, and after 10 minutes or so, it finally stopped, but he kept saying how crazy it was because he hadn't had a nosebleed since he was a kid and wrecked his bike. The second thing was how everyone felt as the morning went on. We were supposed to ski again that day, considering it was the whole point of the trip, but about an hour after we'd been up, everybody started saying they were too tired and exhausted to do anything, and I felt it too. The longer we were up and around, the more sluggish and wiped out I felt. It would have been miserable up on the mountain feeling the way I did. We called the whole day off and decided to stay at the house and do nothing, and that's the part that really gets to me. Every single one of us agreed to do that. There were no arguments or disappointment from anyone. We are all very fit, strong skiers, and most of us exercise in one way or another every day. Nothing we did should have wiped us out like that, and none of us were even hungry until later that night. We spent the entire day sitting around the house, napping and watching TV, and that night, which was our last night there, we watched a movie and finally ate some food. There was no drinking, the hot tub stayed empty, and it was the laziest ski trip I've ever been on. When I left the next morning, everyone seemed to have a little more energy, but the whole happy vibe was gone. We were kind of like zombies getting out of there. The drive home took a lot out of me too. I think I went to bed at like 6 p.m. when I got home. Not long after this trip, I was talking to Clint on the phone and it all came up. We both agreed that it had been one of the weirdest things we've ever experienced. Clint told me he didn't even remember leaving the balcony. The only memory he had was waking up on the couch and feeling like absolute crap. I guess his girlfriend felt the same way, and so did the other two couples. He also told me more about his nosebleed and how it came out of nowhere. I didn't know it at the time, but it really scared him. We both came to the same conclusion before we got off the phone. Something happened to us that we were unaware of. Then Clint told me he shouldn't have tried to signal those lights, which I couldn't believe he said because I had been wondering if they had anything to do with how we were all feeling. I just didn't say it out loud. Whatever it was, it's awfully suspicious to me that we were all affected by something right after being on the balcony that night. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.